Ian here, and you're tuning into the Soulful Man Show. We're exploring the topic of how to tune into our desire to access more of our personal power. And I put together this speaker series with some awesome people who are really connected to guiding others towards this in some way through their own path and work. I have Rob with me here today. Rob is an author, and he guides people in the art of communicating to reveal more of themselves and enrich and enliven our relationships. Thanks for being with us today, Rob.
My pleasure. Good to have you.
You want to start maybe by sharing a little bit about where you are at in your work today?
Oh, my life has been a whirl. Very exciting. It's ever changing. I am 49 years old. I've been in solo practice for 5 years at this point. I published my first book, Unhidden, about 7 months ago in December 2018. I'm working on my second book, which is a memoir, kind of my journey through my transformation in a very sex positive, wild, crazy 10, 15 years of my experience. Married, co-parent two girls, have two dogs, live in a gated community, and have a great life.
Awesome. Nice summary.
Indeed.
Yeah. So could you tell us a little bit about like what got you onto the path that you're on, how that sort of begun for you?
Sure. Two major events in my life. The first was Burning Man.
Mm.
In 1998, when I was 28 years old. I went and had a huge breakthrough and awareness, and got me out of my yuppie vanilla status quo, my father's path. And
Yeah.
the second was I made a total fool of myself in the first workshop I took about 7 months later in San Francisco in March of 1999.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? That sounds
Sure.
interesting.
Well, so I was, married, successful, had a, corporate America job, had a house in San Francisco. Just, everything looked right, but nothing really felt right. If you know that experience, it's just like all the trappings. I had the American success. I was climbing up the corporate ladder. I had an attractive wife. The issue was that we weren't having sex, really the standard amount of sex, which was maybe once or twice a month. And then usually fueled by alcohol tended to help. And so one day at work, Carol, my first wife, said, hey, she called me up and said, do you want to take a class on sex? When you're not having sex with someone, when she offered to take a class on sex, the answer was, well, yes, I would love to. Fast forward about 3 weeks, I'm walking to a workshop downstairs in a circle full of very attractive people, my first workshop. And the instructor, we were doing introductions. And so I did my introduction, and after, my 2 or 3 minute monologue, thought I'd nailed it, thought I was clever, thought I was funny, thought the teacher would say, hey, do you want to come teach with me? Or people would clap. And instead, this guy, Erwan Devan, who's still teaching, said to me, hey, do you know your wife's crying? And she was sitting right next to me, maybe like a foot away, but I was so self-involved. I had no awareness on her. And I turned my head and I was like, oh. And then Erwan did the worst thing possible. He said, okay, who's next? And I got to sit in the burn of that for like 2 more hours of introductions, no approval, no solace. And I had 2 choices. One was to stand up, invite Carol to come with me, go back to my status quo. The second, the one I chose, was to sit in the burn, to figure out what was going on inside of me, what was going on in a relationship. And that started this epic journey that's now over 20 years old and thousands of stories later.
Wow. Okay. Well, that sounds powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And that was your first marriage.
That was my first marriage to Carol. Right.
Okay. And yeah, this is a common starting point, it seems, or a focal point for change, and kind of getting people's attention, which is what we've been ignoring in ourselves in intimacy and in the pursuit of pleasure, i.e. through through, through our sexual relations.
Hmm. Yeah, if you look at, I don't know if you're a fan of Joseph Campbell, but he talks about the hero's journey.
Yeah.
And there's the seen and unseen, or the familiar and unfamiliar. And basically every story, the monomyth that Joseph Campbell talks about, is the protagonist, that would be me in the story, is going along life, and life is okay, it's just
Mhm.
normal. And then there's this event. He calls it the call for adventure, with a wake up call. Every hero has it, just that moment where you're just like, oh, either the call of Luke Skywalker to go fight the Empire, or Speed, the movie Speed, when Keanu Reeves has to jump on the bus to save the bus. It's that moment, that call for adventure, and either you answer the call yes, or you refuse the call. So that was my call. And then all of a sudden, if you look at the circle of hero's journey, there's a whole epic adventure, meeting the mentor, atonement with the father, all these different pieces of the puzzle. And so for
Mhm.
me, that was my wake up call to say, do I want to, matrix, red pill or blue pill? Do I want to go back, or do I want to go? Took the red pill, and my life has never been the same.
Mm. Yeah. I definitely had one of those moments also,
Mm,
going back, probably about 16, 17 years ago. So I can relate to that. And it sounds like, without getting into anything too personal, that there was a reflection, at least at that time, of what was not working, or where there was pain, or where there
hmm.
was disconnect. And however you chose to go into that or through that, um, you've obviously come quite a ways.
Indeed. I
Yeah.
mean, there's nothing too personal. I mean, my whole life is living unhidden,
Right.
so totally available to talk about it. But there was so much. There was so much in there that was not seen. It's what we call in my shadow. I could not see it. I could not reveal it. There was an extensive amount of my life I was hiding from my
Mhm.
partner. There
Mhm.
was a lot of anger. There was a lot of frustration. I was really living someone else's dream. I was living my father's dream
Mhm.
rather than my own. And I just thought it was normal. I thought this is like how we live in society. And that moment, that just one tender moment of me totally making a fool of myself, was the doorway deep into my soul, deep into my psyche, which has led to 20 years of really amazing experiences.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess we can just imagine what happened, or that something very profound to change the course of your life happened when you
Hmm.
decided to reveal what was there, when you
Hmm.
discovered what was there. Um, and I've got a similar journey, and can see through that lens. I'm sure many people do.
Hmm.
So yeah. So then, obviously, you were walking a completely different path, and now the path that you followed has, led you into your work,
Hmm.
and the discovery that you had of, I suppose, what you wanted became
Hmm.
so compelling that it's powered you
Hmm.
to this point along this 20-year journey.
Hmm.
And so could you talk a little bit about that, as that's the theme for today? It's just this relationship between, um, knowing what we want, what that is. People hear this all the time, but it's a nectar. It's a gasoline, or it's a fuel
Hmm.
that pushes us, or pulls us, or compels us in a direction. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, people are moved by inspiration or desperation.
Hmm.
We read a great book, we hear a great podcast, we meet a great teacher, and they inspire us, and they move us. I had a great football coach. I had a great American history teacher in high school that inspired me. He was one of those teachers that just got inside and woke up this desire to love of history and research.
Hmm.
That's one side of it. The other side of it is the concept of desperation, like that moment. Like I was in a point of desperation. Like I could not stand to look at myself anymore in that moment in that workshop, because I didn't like what I saw, and the blinders came off. And so, from a moment of desperation, some people, the desperation is overweight, or their third marriage ends. They have a toxic relationship with pornography or alcohol or drugs.
Hmm.
It's that wake up call. It's we're like, oh, I'm desperate. And my viewpoint is, when the pain of change is less than the pain of staying the same, people change. So, like, if you're so sick of looking yourself in the mirror that you're willing to go to the gym and do the reps and sweat it out, when the pain of change, the status quo, or maybe your heart problems or health problems are pushing you, then you actually make change.
Hmm.
So, and you can pick that choice. Either it's inspiration or desperation. Inspiration tends to be more pleasurable. Desperation tends to be a little more, unless you have a really strong will, propelling. But really, the two of them, you can just look at yourself and say, I want to improve my life. How do I build a practice to have that? That's the moment of choice.
And so you were motivated initially by desperation.
Totally
Yeah,
desperation.
yeah. You discovered, maybe you didn't know, but I mean, a lot of us can be suffering or not suffering because we're in a place where we're numb or we're not feeling, we're completely disconnected
Hmm.
from many things in our lives, and disconnected from ourselves. And then finally, that moment of realization when we wake up becomes so unbearably painful that it pushes us away from, or in a direction. And then I hope, I hope that at some point, although, lots of us can be continually compelled by fear, we've got that at our tails and it's burning our path. But I do hope that at some point, the pain does push us in a direction where we discover something else.
Hmm.
And in terms of your own work, like, what was that? Like, what was the feeling where, you were in so much pain now it caused you to look in another direction, or to make some connection, that you suddenly felt different?
It's important to note, when I walked into that workshop, I was a good guy. I was a good husband. I was a good partner. I was a good citizen. There was nothing, quote, wrong with me.
Mm,
I was just dumb. Really, I called myself, I was numb and dumb. And that's, the affliction, I think, of the modern man, especially with technology, especially with porn, especially with video games, especially with disconnection from our feelings. So I was just a numb and dumb guy who didn't know any better.
yeah,
And I had the good fortune to have a wife who said, this isn't acceptable. Why don't we go work on this? I had no idea what was going to happen to me. I had no idea I was going to make a fool of myself, or that would be the catalyst, for me to go way off my father's path into this great journey I've been on.
yeah,
But I was a good guy, and it really came down to it. In that moment of pain, I was just like, I want to be better than this. And that's really important too. It's not like I don't want to be good. I just want to be better than this. And even back then, I saw that I was a good guy who wanted to be better. Little did I know that first, hit, or that first experience was one of 100 ego deaths, and really challenging moments, and great teachers, like, ripping my soul open and saying, hey, do you see what I see? And all those experiences. And I just had, an innate curiosity and a desire to just becoming a better and better man. And I had great teachers, I had great experiences, and now 20 plus years later, the most valuable thing about those experiences, I truly like myself, like deeply, deeply know myself and like myself. And most men I know um, really don't, and they just really don't like themselves. And so it's just a sad state of affairs. Unless you're willing to do the work, you stay in that spot.
yeah. It's a struggle. It's true. And there's not that many visible role models in each of our lives to be able to give us that reflection of ourselves, which
Right.
which we ultimately need, and which pain can bring us to the doorsteps of.
Yeah.
And you have you've had, yeah, the many ego deaths. Was there something along the way that really kind of made you feel made you feel yourself? Like, for me, I was a martial artist for 30 years, and within my own movement practice, I discovered a level of freedom. It's just like
Hmm.
breaking free in my own body, and my own movement was so compelling that it brought me in a direction that
Hmm.
was just so juicy, and so, like, I just wanted to be there because it's like chocolate. It tastes good, and it feels good, and I just want to be there. Did you have something along the way that made you feel like, wow, this just feels good? It really feels really, really good just to be me,
Hmm.
like, for the first time, something really compelling.
The whole adventure had high highs and low lows. So
Yeah.
there were some of the most epic experiences of my life in those 20 years.
Right.
Building a business based on sexuality, building a community, deep intimate relations, the kind of conversations you dream about the truth and the authenticity, deep connection with men, deep connection with women. The whole experience. On the downside, there was moments of pain. There was intense jealousy. There was my self esteem dropping, getting squashed, and so it was the spectrum. The thing that, to answer your question specifically, is I felt alive, truly alive,
Mm.
for the first time in my adult life when I started to do the work. So
Mhm.
when I was younger, I was really motivated a lot by sports. I was a football player, I was a lacrosse player, growing on the East Coast, and there were moments in sports where I felt this sounds kind of weird, but it felt godlike, not the God, but a godlike, like where the power of the youth, and you're making a great block, or you're running down the field, and you just feel like you could run forever. Those are the moments I had in my youth.
Mhm.
And as I got older and more entwined in the malaise of society, I felt more and more thick. I was physically overweight, but I was also energetically overweight. And so what happened with this process of finding myself was just this reconnection to that thrill of living.
Mm.
Even in the worst times, there was the thrill of living.
Yeah, I can totally feel that. One of the other speakers was talking about this idea of being on the frontier of challenges and challenging ourselves,
Hmm.
um, challenging ourselves with with things that are meaningful, and feeling all the things that happen along the way of each
Mm.
challenge, which is some kind of an inevitable disappointment, or as
Hmm.
you say, the ego deaths, or having a set of expectations blow up in your face, doing it anyways, discovering what's really there. um, all of these things are very enlivening.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Completely.
yeah.
Completely.
And so in your work with people, what would you say is there a theme? Are there any themes to what kind of stands in the way of men? It stands in the way of their being able to access, to like know what they want, to know what they truly desire, just to have that, access to knowing.
My research, I did extensive research for the book, and also my own experiences, my own coaching.
Hmm.
The thing that I think are really affecting men is the change in the last 50 years. When you look at the history in terms of the what's called the patriarchy has been around for 6,000 years. Really came as an advent of land ownership, and really was impelled by that. In the beginning, the patriarchy was a really intelligent system built to ensure more order and to take care of the clan. And now, 6,000 years later, it has kind of a negative connotation, but it really started off with fine intentions. So
Hmm.
6,000 years, and then if you look at what happened is women throughout that period first benefited and then eventually felt victimized by it, and as well are men. Men are victimized by the patriarchy. But what happened around 170 years ago, the women's suffrage movement in 1848 sparked women's equal right. And then in 1920, the 19th Amendment. Just 100 years ago, women had the right to vote. Then we had the 1940s, where women were thrust into a position of men's power and men's working with World War II, really
Hmm.
thrust. And then there was the pushing of women out in the 50s and the early 60s. Women were trying to push back into the kitchen and back to their roles. And then in the 60s, as we all know, everything got etch a sketched. The schooling system started to empower girls, women under 18, especially around the areas of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And then what's happened in the last 50 years, if you look at the statistics, it's really epic. Things like the schooling system, men dominated the schooling system until around 50 years ago, with 66% of graduates and PhDs, and now it's totally flipped. Women are now in that position. The
Hmm.
gender pay gap was 64 cents of a woman's dollar to a man's dollar in the 1980s, is now 93 cents for white millennial women entering the workforce. People are getting married later. There's more single adults now in the US than people in couples. And so we've just seen a really epic change these last 50 years compared to the 6,000 of habits passed down from generation to generation. And so, to answer your question, men now don't know who to be without the scripts that were handed to them by their fathers and grandfathers and great grandfathers. They don't know how to interact with a modern woman. They don't know who to be in this diverging time, the empowerment of women and the status quo of men. And so it's really difficult. Add to the double-edged sword is men aren't given the right, especially white cisgendered men, to complain. Because we're in the quote privileged end quote position, we don't have the right to say we're scared or fear or don't know who to be. And so men push down their emotions. They're not allowed to emote. And so we have the world changing, men not able to talk about it, tending to shut down, move to numbing and distractions rather than stepping up to the greatest party in all time. They're tending to quit, shrink, and complain.
Well summarized.
Thank you. Well, I wrote the book on it. So, and it's so sad because like really the women I interact with, like, where are the men to play with? Let's play. And like these women are more sexually open. They're economically viable. They're independent. It really could be the time where men could have the most fun ever. But instead of what author Michael Kimmel calls aggrieved entitlement, we're kind of shrinking and not playing. So it's heartbreaking for me to watch the experience of what's happening in society today.
It's heartbreaking to go through it, to suffer the experience as a man, where the reflections from everywhere, the invalidations from everywhere, make it impossible or next to impossible to know by looking outward. And then it's the most perfect possible thing that we could have to push us, to force us,
right,
to look inwards and create something new.
And men have to. We have to. I mean, really is. I mean, it's a biological definitive need for men to step up to interact with. It's like it's the society is calling, and it's hard. I mean, it was hard for me in that moment when I got my ass kicked. Like, I understand how hard it was. I was very tempted in that 2-hour burn to stand up, say, screw this, and go back. Like, I really get it. But I can tell you, if you're listening, just the simple things, these are not have to be mind-boggling things. You don't have to do what I did. Like, you could start to take simple, minute tasks to improve your life. And then self-esteem is built upon esteemable acts. When you do one thing to build your self-esteem, it's then easier to build your next level. And your next level, you can attract friends and intimate partners to help. And all of a sudden, your whole life can change with one moment of time deciding, I want more.
That's great. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Can you speak a little bit more about that? Just, just in terms of like how to help guide people towards or back, and in the move forward, or just in the first step, like what does that look like? What kinds of things can men do to begin to create that forward motion?
I have a framework in Unhidden, my book, that describes this. It's a 7-step process. And the first step is what I call confront. And confront is also means to see, to notice, to experience. And what that is pulling down of the blinders, taking off of the glasses, that are blocking your vision, and just looking around your life, doing an inventory, a fearless moral inventory of your life, and say, okay, God, I'm 20 pounds overweight. I tend to eat processed food. I'm on gaming sites 2 to 3 hours a day. I'm watching too much porn. My relationship is, I feel drifting. I feel the sensation of drifting from my partner. I'm really angry at my dad and I don't know why. Like, whatever that is, like from a non-judgmental point of view, just confront and look at your life and see the parts that you're not thrilled about. Like, you should be thrilled about all aspects of your life. And if there's part of your life you're not 100% thrilled about, okay, in that there's a possibility to make it better. in the possibility of making it better. And I'm not talking like huge leaps. I'm like losing 5 pounds. What would that do to your self-esteem? Just like these minute little changes. If you head in the changes of optimizing and improving your life, then the ramifications are humongous.
Hmm.
But you have to look first. The first step is to confront.
Right. So to notice,
Notice.
take a look, notice, and then I guess, also to feel it. If you notice it, I guess it would be impossible not to feel what isn't working out or what you don't like in your life. So
Right.
you feel the pain of
Right.
being however many pounds too heavy, or being in
Right.
the wrong job, or in a bad
Very
relationship.
uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's very uncomfortable. I'm not saying this is easy
Yeah.
or simple. I'm not saying this is complicated,
Hmm.
but it's challenging to
Yeah.
confront these parts, because then you have to. I just talked to a guy who hasn't had sex in 20 years. 20 years, and it's a
That's definitely some kind
convoluted.
of record.
It's a convoluted story,
Wow.
and in this conversation, he's like, it's not, the sex was very obvious that he hadn't had sex in 20 years, but the disconnection connected, the fear, the lack of self-esteem. He's a good guy, and actually a good-looking guy. He
Mm.
just has been in fear of
Mm.
intimate connection. So in that conversation, just the ramifications of 20 years of avoidance, that's where the challenges are. And he's doing the hard work to say, okay, I want the next 20 years of my life not to be sexless. I want to have sex now. So basically, we're on that path.
Right. Well, I guess it's probably hard to provide the advice to people who are so avoidant. If they're so avoidant, they probably are not watching. Um, they got to be ready to want to take a look and see what's there. And then once they see it, once they feel it, then you're saying, it sounds like, to just take those small, each change is comprised of many steps, just to begin to take those steps towards what they would want their life
Well,
to look
my process, I'll just say it quickly.
like.
So
Yeah.
there's confront, there's
Hmm.
investigate.
Hmm.
We live in an information rich time. Go to Google, search porn addiction. Then there's commitment. And commitment, just like, I'm going to make a change. I'm going to do this. I'm not sure how or what. I'm just committing. It's really important to say, I want to work on this for a minimum of some period of time, 30 days. I'm just going to look at my porn addiction for 30 days. Then you build a practice around it. And sometimes it's really helpful to have a coach or a professional help you build that practice. During that practice period, 30 days, 6 months, a year, whatever, it's good to have accountability, a buddy. It's good to have the right to modify your program if it's not healthy for you. Then you run the practice. At the end, you debrief, celebrate, and then recommit to another practice if you want. So commit, investigate, commit, build a practice, and then celebrate are sort of the abbreviated steps. And just take one thing at a time. Just take one thing. If take the easiest thing. Take the thing that's to lose 5 pounds. Cut out dairy. Cut out gluten. I do something called intermittent fasting. 16 hours off, 8 hours on. Changed my life. I like it. It's healthy. It's easy. It's just these little things that can make your life better.
Hmm. So you feel, by doing these, because there's levels of being there's levels of not knowing, and we might, from my experience and from what I see, people think they know what they want. Often just taking a look and seeing, well, looking at your neighbors, or looking at your community, or just
Mm-hmm.
looking out there in the world, people think, well, I want that. And so they go out there and they take a look at others, and they project what they think is better than what they
Mm-hmm.
have. Do you feel that in taking these steps, that ultimately people are going to be able to filter through that in the movement, in the motion, in going in the wrong direction, or going in a direction that is not really connected with what they truly want?
Well, it's challenging because people tend, especially with social media, tend to promote or paint a picture of the optimized everything is great life, and tended social media platforms and profiles don't tend to be honest. So I'm a yes to the inspiration. I just would not use that. I would be very conscious of,
Mm-hmm.
you're an individual practice, you're in a solo practice, you're finding what feels good to you. So yes to the inspiration, just don't compare. Comparison is the devil, because you never win when you compare. Either you're suffering because you're less than, or you're disconnecting by saying you're better than. So
Right.
I would use the flash of others, but then I would look internal for your own internal practice. Measure your success based on your own internal measurement rather than other people's.
Right. Yeah, that's good advice. So, in terms of your own path and your own growth, and what keeps you really like inspired and growing and developing at your in your growing edge.
I got hooked. There's no other way to put it. I got hooked on personal development and personal growth. I got intrigued by it. And then I surrounded myself with people who inspire me. I have, probably a good 100 people in my inner circle. I wouldn't call them all intimate friends, but 100 people I look to, watch to, and we're in communication around continuing to nudge each other towards our mastery. I love the concept of mastery. And guess what? Mastery is like a rainbow. You just keep chasing it. It keeps, getting a
Mm-hmm.
little ahead of you. And just every, mountain I climb, I look, there's another mountain to climb, but it's thrilling. The second thing is I married a woman who also is interested in mastery and is also really into her own self-development. So we're total geeks
Mm-hmm.
together. I mean, it's just like we come home and she's like, "Blah, blah, blah," and I'm like, "Blah, blah, blah." And well, she talks more than I do, but like we just like rap and then we inspire each other.
Mm-hmm.
And then she has children, and which is for me being the most optimized man to be a father figure. Now, I'm not their father, but to be the most positive father figure for them keeps me on my toes, because I
Right.
can realize my resentment. They pick up resentment like that. So I'm inspired. I'm inspired to show them how I think a woman should be treated, and how Morgan, my second wife, demands to be treated. And in that keeps me on my toes.
Mm.
Physical fitness is a really big piece of my life, and finding what feels good to me. And then I've chosen to live publicly. I have chosen to live unhidden, which means that there are people out there who are inspired by me, overtly saying, I have one guy, Elvis. He lives in Ireland. He's been following my podcast diligently for 3.5 years. Every show, I do my shows live on Facebook Live. He writes, "Ace, Rob," or "That show was awesome." And I can't, I've set myself up. I can't quit the podcast. Not that I really want to. Sometimes I
Right.
do, but I can't quit because of Elvis. And so, I've set myself up with accountability. So it's creating fun games for me to inspire me. And I can tell you, I enjoy getting out of bed every day. I can't wait to get to the office. I can't wait to see what my mind creates. I can't wait to help my customers and my clients and my CFO clients. So it's set myself up for a really epic, magical life.
Those are beautiful key points. Wow, you've created a community for yourself. You're surrounded
Right,
by people that are that want to challenge themselves, that do challenge themselves, and you communicate with them and challenge yourself, and
right,
you're in an aligned relationship where it's in your home,
right.
and you wake up every morning and it's with you, and you're surrounded by the woman that you love and her children, her offspring. So the child component,
Indeed.
that's fabulous. And
Yeah,
you're speaking out, you're in your place of truth in the world live.
right.
Yeah.
And let me also say, this is the most isolated time in the history. We live in an isolated world. There was a Boston Globe great story that talked about men over 50 fear isolation more than cancer. Right? We live with more single adults for the first time, and it gets worse as you get older. So, for someone listening, looking around, saying, "I don't have any friends. I don't have any community," I just want to say this is becoming more and more the social norm. And at the same time, this is the easiest time to build community. If you're in a geographically remote, challenging area, you do have technology, but there's also things like Meetup. There's a lot of social clubs. There's really a lot of possibility, but you got to get off the couch. You got to turn off Netflix. You got to put the frozen pizza away, and you've got to get out there. Without you having agency to create the life you want, It's not
Mm-hmm.
going to come to you.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, that's the trick. It's available if you get off your butt.
That's such a brilliant point. It's like people, we do definitely feel the isolation, the disconnection, the sort of the focused attention that's required. Like it's this call to consciousness. If you're not
Hmm.
conscious about what you want, you're not going to get anything,
Right.
or you'll get the status quo, and that's
Right.
really shit these days.
Yep.
Yeah, very, very well said. Well, thanks so much, Rob.
My pleasure.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me on.
it was great hearing your point of view, and you do have a gift for everybody watching, I understand.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I wrote my book Unhidden. It's a book for men and those confused by them, which means everybody. I wrote it as a pragmatic conversational guide to start conversations. And people reading it have talked about improving their relationships, but also their work relationships. And, oh, that's why that relationship didn't work out. So really, I wrote it for men to wake up, which has been the motivation, but also for women to understand the plight that men are going to so we can better relate to be better friends and allies. And it's available on physical, audio, and Kindle. And I produced 3 free chapters. If you want to take a listen, is my free gift. So you can download 3 chapters on audio. I speak it. It was so much fun to record, and get a taste and see if it'll be of value to you.
Awesome. Okay. Well, great. Well, those 3 chapters then on audio file are available. There's a button on this page, so everybody that's watching, you can just click on that button and you can download those free chapters. Thanks, Rob. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, awesome. And thanks everyone for watching. And tomorrow we're going to be with Philip Shepard. So bye for now.